Did Joe Biden just call out Stephen Colbert on his own show? That's the moment the entire audience went silent. You could almost hear the tension cut through the air like a knife. What started off as a light-hearted late-night chat turned into something no one could have predicted. One awkward joke, one misstep, and suddenly, the interview took a hard left into uncomfortable territory. Why did President Biden suddenly stop smiling? Why did Colbert's usual charm fall flat? And more importantly, what was said off camera that had the crew scrambling behind the scenes? This wasn't just a minor flub or a harmless misunderstanding. No, what you're about to witness is one of the most bizarre, uncomfortable, and borderline confrontational interviews Colbert has ever hosted. It was meant to be a smooth PR appearance, a casual stop on the promo trail, but what viewers got instead was a tense, awkward back and forth that had even the audience unsure whether to laugh or hold their breath. Was Biden pushed too far with one of Colbert's infamous gotcha questions? Or was it Stephen who felt blindsided when the president veered off script and made an unexpected and very personal comment on live television? Stay with us because what happened next might just change how you see both of them. And hey, if you're into these wild, raw, and totally unfiltered moments from Hollywood, politics, and everything in between, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. We bring you the most controversial celebrity moments you won't see on the news. This isn't the polished soundbite version you'll find in press releases. This is the real, behind-the-scenes unraveling of a moment that went from scripted to chaotic in mere seconds. And trust us, this is only the beginning. Because right after the commercial break, Colbert leans in with a smirk, clearly ready to poke fun at the president's age. But Biden? He doesn't laugh. He doesn't even blink. Instead, he stares Stephen down and says something that makes the entire studio gasp. So what did President Biden say that left Colbert speechless? And why is no one at CBS talking about what happened after the camera stopped rolling? Buckle up. The truth behind this awkward interview is a whole lot messier than you think. Next, we take you inside the moment Biden's demeanor changed, and the strange question that triggered it all. It all began like any other typical appearance on The Late Show. The stage lights flared, the band played their signature tune, and the audience clapped as Stephen Colbert welcomed his special guest, President Joe Biden. At first, everything was routine. Biden smiled, waved to the crowd, and exchanged a few pleasantries with Colbert. The two had shared friendly banter before, especially during Biden's campaign days. This wasn't their first sit-down, but it would become their most unforgettable. Colbert opened with the usual light fare. He joked about the president's ice cream obsession, teased him about his aviator sunglasses, and even brought up a humorous meme. Biden laughed, nodded, and played along like a seasoned political veteran who knew how to keep things smooth. But underneath that casual laughter, there was a strange tightness in Biden's responses. He chuckled, but not quite all the way. He smiled, but his eyes seemed preoccupied. He wasn't quite present. It was subtle, but if you look closely, you could tell something was off. Colbert, ever the performer, didn't miss a beat. But then the tone shifted. With a sly grin, he leaned forward and said, "Mr. President, do you ever forget what you came on the show to talk about?" The audience chuckled. It was meant as a joke, a jab at Biden's age, something late-night hosts have alluded to for months. But this time, Biden didn't laugh. Not even a smirk. Instead, he paused, looked at Colbert, and in that pause, that uncomfortable dead-air silence, you could feel the tension rise. "Stephen," Biden said, his voice calm but flat, "do you forget what it's like to actually serve the American people instead of just talking about them from a studio?" The room went quiet. Colbert's grin twitched. The crowd didn't know whether to laugh or clap. It was no longer a joke. It was a challenge. What had just happened? Was Biden taking the bait? Or had he been waiting for that moment to clap back at months of late-night ridicule? Colbert tried to pivot, saying, "Well, that's one way to break the ice." But Biden wasn't done. He shifted in his seat and added, "You know, jokes land better when they come from a place of respect." The air was thick, no laugh track, no punchline, just silence. And the uncomfortable realization that this interview had just derailed. Hard, but why? Why was Biden so on edge? Was there something deeper brewing beneath the surface? As Colbert tried desperately to steer the conversation back on course, Biden had already crossed a line, and what he'd say next would only make things worse. Coming up, Biden doubles down, and the interview spirals further into one of the most painfully awkward moments in late-night TV history. By now, the atmosphere had completely changed. The audience wasn't laughing anymore. They were watching closely, shifting in their seats. Even the band, usually cued to jump in with a quick musical save, stayed silent. Colbert, trying to regain control, chuckled nervously and reached for his blue note card, the one every host uses to navigate back to safer ground. But instead of playing it safe, he did something unexpected. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was a desire to reassert control. Or maybe it was a miscalculation. He leaned forward again, tapped the edge of his card against the desk and asked, "Mr. President, do you ever feel like you're too old for this job?" There it was, the question everyone danced around but rarely asked directly, and Colbert had just put it on the table on national television. A hush fell over the studio. Biden blinked, slowly. Then he sat back, placed his hands on the armrests of his chair, and just stared at Colbert for a moment. "You know," he said, his tone heavy, "I've buried a wife. I've buried 2 children. I've served this country for over 5 decades. And not once have I let anyone tell me I'm too old to care." The crowd didn't clap. They didn't know how to respond. Biden wasn't angry. He wasn't yelling. But the weight of what he said hit like a ton of bricks. Colbert tried to soften it, replying, "I didn't mean it like that, I meant." But Biden cut him off. "No, I get it. You meant to be clever. You always do. But let's not pretend we don't know what's going on here. You think the only thing people want to hear is whether I've lost a step. You want a moment that trends, a soundbite." The cameras caught Colbert's face, visibly rattled. This wasn't how the interview was supposed to go. He was the one who usually had control. But now, he looked like a man who realized he'd stepped too far and couldn't walk it back. The tension didn't just hang in the air. It pressed down on everyone in the room. A production assistant was spotted off stage, gesturing wildly, trying to cue a segment break. But the train had already left the tracks. Biden continued, "People want leadership. They want compassion. They don't care about late-night punchlines when they're worried about their jobs, their kids, or whether democracy survives the next election. So if I'm old, fine. But don't confuse age with apathy." It was clear Biden had taken the gloves off. And Stephen Colbert, for once, had no witty comeback. Just a stunned expression and a growing realization. He'd lost the room, but things weren't done unraveling. Because right after the break, Colbert tries to reclaim control. And what happens next is even more shocking. After a rushed commercial break, cameras faded back into an eerily different energy. The band played, but half-heartedly. The clapping was scattered. Colbert returned to his desk with a tightened jaw and a stare that no longer carried his usual sparkle. This was no longer just an awkward interview. It had become a duel, and Stephen Colbert, America's beloved satirist, wasn't about to sit back and be lectured on his own stage. He leaned forward, his voice now low and deliberate. "Mr. President, I respect your service, truly, but don't mistake a question for disrespect. The American people do have concerns, and sometimes jokes are just ways of saying what they're already thinking." Biden gave a half nod, but didn't break eye contact. He looked unshaken, almost challenging Stephen to keep going. So Stephen did. "You've been in politics longer than I've been alive. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Experience matters. But when people start wondering whether the country's in good hands, shouldn't you be willing to answer even the uncomfortable questions?" The crowd murmured. It wasn't applause, it wasn't laughter, it was confusion, unease. This wasn't a joke anymore. This was 2 powerful men testing each other's limits. Live on national television. Biden sat up straighter, his tone sharpened. "I've answered uncomfortable questions my whole life, Stephen. But let me ask you one. When was the last time you left this studio and sat down with a single mother in Detroit? Or a veteran in Arizona who can't get health care?" Now it was Stephen's turn to go quiet. He blinked, looked at the audience, then turned back to Biden. "This show isn't about policy debates, Mr. President. It's about connecting, humor, humanity. And frankly, if you can't take a joke," Biden raised a finger, "then maybe the joke wasn't funny." Boom. The silence that followed was deafening. One could almost hear the rustling of cue cards behind the cameras. The band didn't dare interrupt. The stage manager was frozen. Even the lighting operator, someone who likely never had to think twice, dimmed the spotlight slightly as if trying to cool the moment. Colbert straightened up, cleared his throat, looked dead into the camera. Well, this got serious fast. Biden didn't smile. He didn't break. He just stared at Stephen. The dynamic had flipped. The playful host had become defensive. The politician, usually on the ropes in these settings, had seized the upper hand. But there was something else simmering under the surface now. Something unspoken. Because just as Colbert was about to pivot to another segment, Biden leaned in and said something off mic. Something the audience couldn't hear. But Colbert's face? It changed instantly. Eyes narrowed. Jaw clenched. Whatever was said, it hit hard. And what came next would leave even the producers speechless. Because Colbert was about to do something he's never done before. The room felt frozen. The kind of stillness that only comes when something sacred is being violated. Or about to be. Stephen Colbert looked rattled. Whatever President Biden had just whispered off mic clearly struck a nerve. His eyes didn't flicker with wit or sarcasm. They burned. And for a brief moment, the carefully constructed mask of the late-night host slipped, revealing something raw. Colbert adjusted his tie. He forced a chuckle, but it was empty. Then, almost as if acting on impulse, he leaned in closer than usual and delivered a line no one expected. "You know, Mr. President, some people say the only reason you're still running is because you're afraid to let go of power." The crowd gasped, audibly. This wasn't satire. This wasn't a joke wrapped in irony. It was a direct accusation, a challenge. Biden blinked, slowly, Then his posture changed. Shoulders back, chin raised, a shift from conversational guest to commander-in-chief. Afraid, he said, his voice now deep and deliberate. I've given more of myself to this country than most people can comprehend. I've bled for it, grieved for it, sacrificed for it. Don't confuse perseverance with fear. But Colbert didn't back down. Then why not step aside? Why not pave the way for a new generation of leadership? You talk about democracy, but sometimes clinging on can do more harm than good. The studio was no longer a set. It was a courtroom, and Colbert had just positioned himself as prosecutor. Biden didn't blink. He locked eyes with Stephen. You think you're speaking for the people. You sit behind a desk and tell jokes for an hour a night. But I've sat in war rooms. I've walked through hospitals. I've watched mothers cry over flag-draped coffins. Don't lecture me about leadership. The tension was unbearable. The camera panned to the audience, a mix of nervous glances, clenched jaws, and wide eyes. The usual late-night rhythm had been obliterated. And then, Colbert crossed the final line. With a tight smile, he said, maybe the people don't need a president who survived tragedy. Maybe they need one who can prevent it. Gasps. One woman in the crowd audibly said, oh my God. Biden looked stunned. Not angry, just stunned. As if even he hadn't expected that. There was no going back now. The interview was scorched. The energy on set, radioactive. For a split second, neither man spoke. And in that silence, everything hung in the balance. Legacy, respect, ego, power. A producer offstage stepped forward, visibly panicked, likely ready to pull the plug. The network wasn't just worried about bad press now. They were staring down a full-blown public relations nightmare. And then, just when you thought it couldn't go any further, President Biden stood up. Coming up, Joe Biden walks off set, and what happens behind the scenes triggers a total media blackout. President Joe Biden stood up, not with a dramatic flare or a burst of anger, but with the slow, deliberate motion of a man who had made up his mind and was done. The audience didn't know what to do. Some gasped, others whispered. One person even nervously clapped, only to stop mid-applause as they realized this wasn't that kind of moment. Colbert blinked, visibly thrown. Mr. President, he started, trying to pull the moment back, but it was already gone. Biden didn't shout. He didn't lash out. He simply leaned toward Colbert's desk and said, off mic but caught by a boom nearby, you want a headline, Stephen? Here it is. I don't do this for entertainment. With that, he turned and walked off the set. No cue from the producers. No commercial break. Just silence. And the camera awkwardly lingering on his back as he exited stage left. Colbert froze. For the first time in years, he didn't know what to say. Then chaos erupted. Producers swarmed. Stage managers scrambled. The showrunner could be heard off camera shouting, cut to band, but the band didn't play. They were stunned too. A floor assistant tried to intercept Biden before he reached the back hall, but Secret Service had already closed ranks. A moment later, the president and his team disappeared behind a black curtain, and just like that, he was gone. Colbert remained seated at his desk, eyes darting, clearly processing what had just happened. He turned to the camera, trying to salvage the moment. Well, that's one for the books, he muttered, forcing a weak laugh that no one joined. Behind the scenes, it was mayhem. A CBS executive stormed down from the control booth, headset still on, barking orders. Kill the segment, pull the feed, get PR on the line now. Multiple sources later confirmed that producers immediately contacted the White House, not to apologize, but to coordinate damage control. The network was panicking. A walk-off from the sitting president of the United States? That wasn't just a bad night, it was a full-blown crisis. Staffers who witnessed the exchange backstage claimed Biden looked calm, almost relieved. One crew member said he heard Biden mutter, "That man doesn't know when to quit." But the damage was done. Rumors began circulating within the hour. Texts flew among DC insiders. Media Twitter exploded. Clips of Biden walking off, even the grainy ones from audience phones, began flooding the internet. And CBS, they scrubbed the official interview. The late-night rebroadcast? Pulled. Online clips? Delayed for editing reasons. But the genie was out of the bottle. Because America didn't just witness an awkward interview. They saw the collapse of a carefully controlled media moment and a president who decided he wasn't playing the game anymore. Next up, the fallout. What happened in the hours after the walk-off and how both camps went into full crisis mode. The minutes after President Biden walked off The Late Show were a blur of whispered phone calls, frantic texts, and stunned silence across two power centers, CBS Studios and the White House. Backstage, producers were pale. One assistant director reportedly leaned against a wall and said, "We just made history, the wrong kind." The network's public relations team immediately went into overdrive, racing to draft a statement before the morning shows could twist the narrative. Meanwhile, word had already leaked. Several audience members, their phones still warm in hand, had managed to post blurry, shaky footage of Biden's walk-off. The captions were ruthless. President storms off Colbert's set. Live meltdown on late night. Colbert versus Biden, who went too far? Within hours, hashtags like Colbert clash and Biden walks out were trending. Journalists scrambled for angles. Late-night competitors stayed quiet. But their writers were definitely watching. CBS held an emergency call with White House staff at midnight. Their shared goal? Contain the wildfire. Colbert's team wanted to pull the interview altogether, replace it with a best-of rerun. But White House aides argued that scrubbing it entirely would only make things worse. After all, the rumors had already exploded. Burying it would just feed conspiracy theorists and alt-media pundits. So they compromised. The version uploaded to YouTube the next morning was a heavily edited cut, trimmed down to 9 minutes, with no mention of the age question, no awkward silence, no walk-off, just smiles, nods, and generic platitudes about unity and resilience. But the internet isn't so easily fooled. People compared it with leaked audience clips, frame by frame. Comment sections were flooded with one repeated phrase. What are they hiding? Political commentators jumped in. Some praised Biden for standing his ground and refusing to be mocked. Others mocked him for being thin-skinned and unpresidential. Fox News had a field day. Tucker Carlson's replacement led with, "Last night, Joe Biden proved what we've been saying all along. The man can't handle pressure, even from a comedian." Progressive circles defended Biden, arguing that ageism disguised as comedy isn't funny, it's lazy. As for Colbert, his silence was deafening. He didn't address the incident directly on the following night's show. Instead, he opened with a flat monologue about summer heat waves and airline delays. Viewers noticed, ratings that night hit an all-time high, but not for the right reasons. People were tuning in for the wreckage. Meanwhile, White House insiders reported that Biden was unbothered, but privately, aides were fuming. One reportedly told Politico, "He went there to talk policy, not be roasted like a Saturday Night Live skit." Behind closed doors, conversations began shifting. Would Biden return to any late-night stage again before the election? Would Colbert be forced to issue a public apology? But the story wasn't over. Because just as things were beginning to cool down, one clip surfaced that no one saw coming. Next up, the leaked footage from backstage that sparked a second wave of outrage and could derail Colbert's credibility for good. Just when it seemed the media storm had peaked, a new clip exploded online, and it was not part of the CBS broadcast. Grainy, unsteady, shot on what looked like a crew member's phone, but its content? Devastating. The footage showed Stephen Colbert backstage, moments after Biden walked off. He wasn't aware he was being filmed, or if he was, he didn't care. He was pacing, furious, muttering under his breath to a staffer. But then, clear as day, he turned towards someone off camera and said, "I don't care if he's the president. If he can't handle a joke, maybe he shouldn't be running the country." There it was, raw, unfiltered, and completely off script. The video leaked on X, formerly Twitter, late that night and was reposted across every social platform within minutes. By dawn, it had over 17 million views. The comments section was split straight down the middle. Colbert just said what millions are thinking. He's not wrong. Disrespectful. Arrogant. You don't talk about the president like that, even off air. He finally showed his true colors. This is why people don't trust the media. Even people who had initially defended Colbert began to second-guess themselves. The tone, the timing, the smirk he gave before saying it, it all painted a picture that didn't align with the friendly progressive persona he usually projected. Within hours, the clip made the rounds on national TV. CNN ran a segment titled "Comedians and the Line Between Satire and Disrespect." MSNBC was more critical, saying Colbert's off-air comments undermined the credibility of late night as a space for thoughtful political conversation. But over on conservative networks, it was open season. He thinks it's his job to humiliate leaders, not entertain. That's the real Colbert, one anchor said on Newsmax. Inside CBS, panic returned. Executives were livid. The network's legal team scrambled to identify who leaked the video, and several staffers were reportedly suspended pending investigation. But the damage had already been done. Colbert's team issued a vague statement late in the day. Stephen deeply respects the office of the presidency. The comments circulating online were made in a moment of private frustration and do not reflect the values of the show or its host. But no apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just corporate fencing. Meanwhile, the White House stayed silent. No press briefing mentioned. No tweets, nothing. But sources close to the administration said Biden was disappointed but unsurprised. Behind the scenes, the political cost was mounting. Some Biden advisors had pushed for these kinds of appearances, arguing that late night could humanize him, connect him to younger voters. But now, that strategy was under serious review. And Colbert? He may have thought he won the moment, but he was about to face a reckoning with his audience, his network, and his legacy. Coming up in the final section, was this just a bad night? Or did Colbert permanently damage the trust between entertainers and elected leaders? The aftermath may surprise you. In the days following the Biden-Colbert confrontation, The entertainment and political worlds remained in a state of suspended animation. For the first time in recent memory, a late-night interview didn't just trend, it fractured trust. CBS continued scrambling, ratings spiked temporarily, but sponsors began asking questions. Some demanded reassurances, others quietly pulled future ad slots. Internally, executives launched a full-scale review of guest protocols. Could satire coexist with statesmanship, or had the show's DNA mutated into something it could no longer control? Colbert's camp remained defensive. Privately, he was said to be fuming, not just at the leak, but at how quickly the public turned. "I've made a career out of challenging presidents," he reportedly said during a tense team meeting. Why is this different? But this was different, because it wasn't just about jokes anymore. A growing portion of his audience, even longtime fans, felt betrayed. The man of the people had been caught mocking someone he claimed to admire, not through satire but through a snide remark, whispered behind the safety of the curtain. Online petitions circulated. One demanded Colbert apologize publicly. Another, more extreme, called for CBS to suspend the show entirely. Political analysts weighed in too. The consensus? Colbert had punched down. Late-night hosts are supposed to be the voice for the public, not the ones throwing elbows at aging public servants mid-sentence. On the other hand, some younger viewers rallied behind Colbert. They argued that Biden should be able to handle the heat, that this was a wake-up call, not an ambush. But even among that camp, the off-camera insult felt petty. As for the White House, their silence continued, calculated, strategic, and clearly meant to let the moment burn itself out. But insiders revealed a critical shift. Biden's media advisors had pulled the plug on all entertainment interviews for the next 6 months. Late-night, morning talk shows, even digital appearances. Gone. For the first time in years, the unspoken pact between politics and pop culture had been shattered. And Colbert? He returned to the desk a week later with a noticeable shift in tone. More guarded, less flippant, still funny but careful. His opening monologue made a veiled reference to the incident, saying, "Sometimes you shoot for a laugh and end up hitting a nerve. And when that happens, you learn. No apology, no retraction, just acknowledgement." But for many, it wasn't enough. The magic was broken. Because in that one interview, something rare happened. The mask came off, on both sides. A president revealed his limits. A host revealed his hubris. And a nation got a front-row seat to the cost of confrontation in the age of constant cameras. So now we ask you, who crossed the line? Did Colbert go too far? Or did Biden overreact? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more raw, unscripted celebrity face-offs, hit that subscribe button. Because here at Star Scoop, we bring you the moments they wish you'd forget. Until next time, stay sharp, stay curious, and keep watching.